Hello, and welcome to Nextera Academy series about theory of constraints. In this part, we are going to continue the process of ongoing improvement. Previous part, we discussed how to answer the questions, what to change, how are we going to identify the core cause which is responsible for multiple undesirable effects the system is experiencing. At this part, we will move to the next step of the process, answering what to change to. What would be the solution for that core cause? Um, so the first step was to find what is this cause that is responsible for all the undesirable effect. Uh, Knowing what the problem is, in mathematics, it is usually said that knowing the problem is half of the solution, but still 50% is missing. So we need to find how to solve this core cause. And again, like in the previous part, the main difference between theory of constraints and other methodologies of problem solving is that it is basing all the analysis on the belief that cause and effect is governing the results the systems are generating. Uh, we ended the previous step by identifying the core cause as one of the erroneous assumptions around the core dilemma we have identified. So what do we do now? We know what the assumption that is erroneous is. How are we going to continue from that point onward? So the first step in the process is to invalidate this erroneous assumption, is to have a clear understanding and proof and certainty that it is indeed erroneous, and what is the other side of that erroneous assumption, i.e. what is the valid assumption that should be used instead of the erroneous one. So to invalidate an assumption, it is possibly simple or can be complicated. The simple is to find at least one example where the assumption is obviously erroneous. Then we know that it is indicating that there is at least one situation where we can build a solution where this assumption is not valid. Sometimes it is not that easy to identify that, and then we will have to do a much more intense analysis to try to invalidate this assumption. Finding this one such example. I'll give you two examples of that so you get a feel of how it looks like. If you look at an erroneous assumption that is identified and verbalized as the company's profit is the sum of the profits of all the sold products, which is a common assumption for many management teams in many companies around the world, it is not difficult to find at least one example where this statement is invalid. It is not difficult to find that there are cases where we are selling products which are not profitable and still the company is making profit, or the other side, that we are selling all of our products in a profitable way and we are still losing money, which is a clear indicator that this is an erroneous assumption. However, if, for example, the assumption would be verbalized as replenishment time from any location too far from the consumer will not be acceptable by the consumer, is a more difficult one to invalidate and requires additional analysis. Once we have a clear proof that the erroneous assumption is indeed invalid, we can define the direction of the solution, meaning the assumption which is valid instead of the one which is invalid. In theory of constraints, we call solution elements injections. It's the terminology. It's not mandatory, just so you are familiar with the terminology. And this is because we inject those solution elements into the existing reality, and through this injection, we are changing the reality. The one injection that we need to invalidate the core dilemma would be also the core injection of the overall solution. So if we take the two examples we looked at, and we take again the erroneous assumption, let's verbalize the all causality with the erroneous assumption. In order to ensure that the company is profitable, all the products that the company sells must be profitable because the company's profit is the sum of the profit of all the sold products. The bold part is the erroneous assumption. Direction of the solution is, once we identify that this is invalid indeed, is in order for the company to be profitable, the total contribution from product sales must be greater than the total operating expenses. So it's not really important if one product is profitable or not. What is important if all the sales have accumulated enough contribution to cover the operating expenses and more in order to be profitable. In the second example, let's again look at the whole causality around the erroneous assumption. In order to secure the best service to the customer, inventories must be located as close as possible to the consumption point, because the replenishment time from any other location will not be acceptable to the consumer. A direction of the solution would be, in order to secure the best service to the customer, most of the inventory must be located as far away as possible from the consumer. Directions are sometimes easy or not too difficult to verbalize, but then when you verbalize them, like the second injection here that we look at, you might feel that it is correct to say it, but meaningless or totally unclear how to convert it to a tangible, doable solution. When an injection is verbalized in such a way, we tend to call it a flying pig, because it seems it will be a reality when pigs will fly. In these cases, we have a process which is called grounding a flying pig, converting this vague direction of the solution into a more practical, tangible one. I'm not going to go through that aspects of grounding the flying pig right now, because we will talk about this as we progress with other parts of the body of knowledge, and then I will relate back to it. But the options we have are breaking the injection into smaller parts, which are clearer, creating a feedback loop. For example, if you say that the injection is, we have enough money for a purpose, you might say that if we are able to create in the overall solution a loop where we start with smaller amount of money, but the solution itself generates additional money that feeds back into the origin point, then with every cycle, the amount of money we have is growing, and eventually we will have enough money to implement the solution we wanted. Sometimes this direction seems to be impossible because it carries too many negatives with it. So we will try to understand those negatives and trim them to make the solution more tangible. And sometimes it looks impossible just because it seems to be so big and so difficult. And then we will use a process in theory of constraints, which is called the ambitious target, which is using a tool called prerequisite tree. And again, we will review those tools in the next parts of this program. Once we have this direction of the solution, we have the core injection, we need to go to the next step, and we luckily, we have created a current reality tree. We have verbalized and constructed the causalities that govern the current performance of the company. So what we will do now, we will use the same exact cause and effect logic, but we will start from the core injection, and we will build upwards using the same causalities. And if we are correct, the same logic will flip the undesirable effects and will convert them to desirable effects. It will not eliminate them. If we say that there is an undesirable effect of too often we do not deliver products to our customers on the time we promised, and if we have a good solution, what will happen is that with time, our reliability of supply will improve. It will never be 100%. This is reality, but it will be very close to it. So the undesirable effect will not change into we never deliver late. It will change that our level of reliability of delivery continuously improves. So throughout building these causalities, we might find that in order to make a cause and effect rigid, strong, clear, we need to add additional injections, additional solution elements. So we will add them until the time that we have been able to connect all the entities of the future reality tree to all of the undesirable effects that flipped into desirable effects. One of the interesting outcomes is that when we get to the top of the tree, oftentimes you will see this positive feedback loop, which I mentioned in the previous slide. So you can see it in this picture over here, coming from the top to the bottom, substantiating the solution, making sure that with time, more and more of the positive of the improvement into the undesirable effects, converting to desirable effects, will continue to accumulate. And we definitely, when we build a future reality tree, we are searching for those entities, for those feedback loops. So this is basically building all the solution. You start with invalidating the core, the invalid assumption of the core dilemma. Once it is invalidated, you create the injection and you inject it into the future reality tree. You build the future reality tree upwards from the core injection, adding injections if necessary, linking all the desirable effects, finding the positive feedback loops, and now you are clear that you have found a solution. Now, what to do with that will be in the next part. So thank you very much for being here today, and look forward for the next one. Please give us your feedback. Thank you. Bye-bye.